Greetings everyone. Welcome to today's lecture, which is part of the series on inequality and difference. The topic of today's lecture is Genesis of Caste and Untouchability, some reflections. For this lecture, I would be discussing one of the writings of Vivekanand Jha titled Caste, Untouchability and Social Justice, Early North Indian Perspective. The lecture will introduce students to several structures of inequalities with special reference to caste system. Fluidity of category visible over a long historical past would be examined to show the role of socio-political economic structures of the time in shaping the character of inequalities, which continue to have their mark even in today's times. So when we are talking about historicity of caste, basically it means how caste solidified with the hardening of class relations in North India between 600 BC and 200 CE, and how untouchability too, which originated in pre-Mauryan times, got accentuated and further developed by 200 CE, a fact that has been explored by Vivekanand Jha. Most of the castes which were initially reduced to the level of untouchables were those which had little share in the distribution of wealth, power or prestige. So, untouchability can be viewed as the extreme manifestation of institutionalized inequality of both caste as well as class and also of status. The untouchables were and remain a part of the Indian caste and class structure. Then we can also highlight the aspect of continuity and change. The expansion of caste and untouchability from 200 CE to 1200 CE was also an uninterrupted and a rather continuous process. So, as a result, several new groups, indigenous as well as alien, were absorbed at various levels of the social structure in different parts, and Varna ideology was flexible enough to effectively cope with developing situations as well as several cross currents. So, as a result, what one sees in history is both an upward as well as a downward social mobility, which sustained the social system, and it also prevented from cracking up under pressures. So, it was this resilience, this ability to change and absorb, of course in accordance to Brahmanical ideology, that was instrumental in the sustenance of the caste system. Now, what was the earliest indication of existence of a fourfold Varna system? The first definite indication of the four-tiered hierarchical inequality was, of course, the famous Purusha Sukta hymn, which was part of the 10th mandala of the Rig Veda, which represented the Brahmana as the mouth, the Rajanya as the arms, the Vaishyas as the thighs, and the fourth Varna as having emanated from the feet of the divine Purusha when he was sacrificed by gods for the sake of the creation of universe. Now, this specific hymn accorded divine sanction to the emerging social structure, as has been remarked by several scholars in this field. The 10th mandala belonged to the latest stratum of the Rig Veda, and it synchronized with some of the later Vedic texts also, and so the terms Rajanya what was popular during the later Vedic period. However, later on, this term during the later half of the later Vedic period got converted, and the categories of Vaishyas as well as the Shudras, they appeared in this hymn for the first and the last time in the Rig Veda. So these three terms of Rajanya, Vaishyas as well as Shudras, they kind of appeared clearly in this hymn. Then as we come to the later Vedic period, as the agrarian setting of the upper Ganges basin was kind of in the process of expansion during the later Vedic period, that is from 1000 BC to 600 BC, there was also an accompanying process of social differentiation which went on steadily, and the four Varnas emerged as distinct and separate from each other, and in fact they appeared as part of a full-fledged social reality. So the Brahmanas emerged as a specialized class of priests who were monopolizing the complex rituals, and also they made their mark as scholars and teachers, whereas the Kshatriyas emerged as warriors and rulers who were controlling the larger territorial units, and also they were controlling the material resources, whereas the Vaishyas emerged as the tribute paying peasants, cattle rearers, artisans, traders, and the fourth Varna came to be demarcated as the domestic servants, the agricultural laborers as well as the slaves. So the increasingly inegalitarian milieu of the times came to be identified with more and more material expansion, and also with more and more surplus that was now available for unequal distribution. So the upper two Varnas, they invariably combined against the two lower Varnas, and as has been mentioned in Aitreya Brahmana, the Vaishya came to be described as Anyasa Balikrita, basically, which means a tributary to others, and also as one who can be oppressed at will. And the fourth Varna came to be described as Anyasya Preshya, that means a servant or a messenger of others, and also one who can be made to work at any time of the day or night, and also one who can be beaten at will. So this kind of a description and the role prescription that was ascribed to these four Varnas speaks volumes about inequality, that how it was being ingrained in the psyche of the times. Now, towards the end of the later Vedic period, the Varnas tended to become hereditary, endogamous and birth based, leading to the formation of jatis. So the term jati is derived from the Sanskrit root jan, meaning to be born. So therefore, a very important development that took place during this period was the concept of jati. Also, one can talk about the theory of karma and rebirth that also was devised as a ways and a means to further justify the existence of this inequitous system. Birth was slowly becoming an important factor of social ranking, and the theory of karma and punarjanam, that means rebirth, which proved such an effective ideology in the internalization of the unequal caste system by the oppressed and the exploited. So therefore, this internalization began automatically due to the kind of philosophy that was being devised. And in fact, this inequitous system was also championed by several heterodox sects silently, for example, Buddhism and Jainism. The Chandogya Upanishad assigned pure birth to the upper three varnas, and the impure birth was ascribed to the untouchables, and in fact they were compared to the animals like the dog and the boar. Attribution of birth in the former category to good deeds and to the untouchables to the evil deeds again became the hallmark of several texts that were compiled. So, the process of expansion of Aryan civilization also gave rise to the process of assimilation, acculturation and integration of the aboriginal tribes into the expanding Aryan network. Now, this was again a very important phenomenon, which again was kind of facilitating expansion of the fourfold Varna system. And as has been described in Aitreya Brahmana, several tribes like the Andhras, the Pundras, Shabras, Pulindas and Mutibas, they were clubbed together as Antas, which means the border people, and the progeny of the defiant, accursed sons of sage Vishwamitra. And this text refers to the forest tribes and the hunters as apachyas with their own chiefs. So, there was definitely some kind of a disdain and mistrust towards these people who were kind of inhabiting the outlying areas, the border. They were described as the border people. So, untouchables and the Polakasas stood at the lowest level of the existing social hierarchy. So, they were kind of ascribed not even the fourth Varna, they were in fact beyond Varna social order, and caste, which was in its formative stage during the later Vedic period, and jati was imbibing many of the traits of Varna by this time. So, interdining among the four Varnas, which was still not prohibited, so was inter-Varna marriage, which was still not prohibited during the later Vedic period, and when there was no concept of untouchability also, however, gradually gave way to all these discrepancies, and a ban on interdining, inter-Varna marriages, as well as the practice of untouchability appears in during the later periods. So, as we describe the post-Vedic society as a class segregated society, so it also developed as a caste segregated society. The post-Vedic period, that is from 600 BC to 200 BC, was marked by the extensive use of iron for expansion, for production, as well as for expansion of economy, a substantial rise in the available surplus, and all these processes also increased the already existing economic inequality. And as a result, a full-fledged class society appeared in the middle Ganga basin, as well as started expanding towards the east. And it was at this point of time that we can say that there was more and more incorporation, more and more intrusion into the lives of forest people and into the forest areas. So, the emergence of a more stratified society, as well as the consolidation of the Varna Jati structure, kind of took shape, and several Dharam Shastras, for example of Apastamba, Gautama and Vasishtha, they reflect clearly this kind of development in the relatively more frequent use of the term jati in the sense of caste. So, therefore, this period can definitely be explained as the period when the concept of jati was becoming mature and it was becoming very crucial part of this segregated social setup. So, Varna continued to be the major term for designating caste, and it occurred 24 times in the Bodhayan Dharam Shastra and 23 times in the Apastamba Dharam Sutra. So, we can say that Dharam Sutras definitely emerged as texts that would lay the ground for some kind of a legal setting. So, they placed the hierarchical social position as well as the occupational roles of the four Varnas in a legal format, and the fourth Varna was ascribed numerous and varied disabilities like obligatory service to the twice born, which were the upper three Varnas, as well as the physical toil, physical hard work as landless agricultural laborers, artisans, wage earners as well as slaves. They were also denied any kind of initiation ceremony with sacred thread known as Upanyana, which was specifically limited to the upper three Varnas. So, from henceforth we can say that exclusion from Vedic study and inequality before law in several matters related to inheritance, rates of interest as well as punishments that they got for doing criminal offences, as well as their lack of access to judicial and high administrative positions, and several restrictions as to commensality, association and marriage with superior Varnas. These all rules and regulations became the norm of the day. So, the fourth Varna substantially provided productive manual labor, and the gap between the elite and the masses further widened, intensifying the notion of the high and the low. So, it is in this background that one can also talk about another very important concept that has been described by Vivekanand Jha as Varna Sankara. The social fabric, which was in a tremendous state of flux during the period of our study, resulted in emergence of several professions, crafts and tribes which were crystallizing as distinct identities, giving rise to the theory of Varna Sankara or mixed castes, and associated with this was the concept of Kali Yuga. Now, Varna Sankara ascribed or it can be described as a process whereby the origin of several new groups was taking place due to interbreeding among the members of the four Varnas and also among their progeny from two kinds of marriages, like Anulom, which was considered in natural order as it was with a woman of lower Varna, and Pratilom kind of marriage, which was considered in an inverted order or with a woman of higher Varna. So, these kind of unions were looked down upon as they resulted in birth of progeny that belonged to mixed castes. It did not belong to a pure caste, and so it was a challenge to the fold Varna system. The Dharam Sutras have mentioned almost 24 such mixed castes. However, there is no uniformity in the number of mixed castes as different sources mention different numbers. So, Bodhayan's treatment of the inhabitants of areas like Avanti, Magadha, Saurashtra, Upavrit, Sindh, Dakshinapath as well as Suviras was a very biased one, as he considered that people belonging to these areas basically reflected loss of status due to non-observance of Varna norms such as Upanyana. Now, several law books also have thrown a lot of light, valuable light, on the concept of untouchability and how it evolved as a very important part of Indian society. So, the notion of pollution became a very important feature of social life, and it came to be institutionalized in several of these law books. So, untouchability basically indicated a permanent and a hereditary pollution due to physical contact with a section of the Indian people, and the group first identified for this purpose came to be known by different terms. Now, there were several instructions that these Dharam Sutras handed down time and again about avoiding any kind of touch or association with the untouchables, as it was considered as polluting, and a very rigid practice of immediately taking bath was prescribed to deal with any such kind of an association. So, any kind of association, even indirect one, was believed to have caused pollution through proximity, sight, hearing, and speech also of the untouchables. So, this physical association and commensal and any kind of sexual ties with the untouchables was completely prohibited, and their segregation was legalized, which was to be enforced strictly not only by religion or by social norms, but even the state had a duty to enforce these laws. Now, there are several other textual references also to social stratification. For example, the Griha Sutras, the Ashtadhyayi of Panini, then Kautilya's Arthashastra, Manusmriti, Patanjali's Mahabhashya, as well as the epics. So, these several textual references indicate that how many new groups were being absorbed within the Varna Jati framework, and their changing position in social hierarchy, their prescribed and actual functions, as well as the fission and the fusion, was clearly indicated through various fables or morals or stories or normal laws that were laid down. So, what was happening in fact was a gradual subjugation of indigenous tribes. So, the various tribes like the Pulakasas and the Medas also came to be, which were in the beginning part of indigenous tribal background, but since they were following non-traditional professions like hunting and food gathering or scavenging, they were also ascribed the status of untouchables, and the steady advance of the organized society and its encroachment into the forest areas largely depleted their source of subsistence and also forced them to join the dominant productive system. So, this partly explains that why so many emerging jatis ended up performing menial jobs. The untouchables emerged as an extremely poor segregated group enlisted to work at the crematorium, hanging criminals or dragging people on the streets, dealing with whipping the criminals, then also whipping adulterous women, and also being forced to defend new settlements in the countryside. So, all the difficult jobs which no one else was ready to do, the so-called menial jobs, were enforced on them. Now, let us look at another very interesting and important aspect when we are talking about 6th century BCE. That was also a time when heterodox sects were emerging. So, we have Buddhism, Jainism, Ajivika sect. So, what was the attitude of these heterodox sects towards caste as well as untouchability. Now, these new religious orders, as you all know, admitted people without considerations of wealth, rank, or social origins. They denied that the four Varna structure had any divine sanction behind it. So, there was definitely this difference that existed between them and the traditional religion. However, if we closely look at the attitude of these heterodox sects towards Varna hierarchy, we would see that even they silently accepted the reality of the four-fold Varna system and several jatis, as well as the concept of untouchability, and consistently they placed the Kshatriyas above the Brahmanas while enumerating the four Varnas. So, even they could not look beyond this kind of a social division. The only difference being that they probably considered Kshatriyas to be of prime importance than Brahmanas. Buddhism regarded agriculture, trade, and animal husbandry as high professions. So, this also partly explains that why so many such a large number of Vaishya Varna was also more confident and forthcoming in joining these heterodox sects. Buddhism accorded an honorable position to the Gahapatis irrespective of their varying Varna background. So, Gahavais belonging to the mercantile community received similar respect amongst Jainism. Now, however, there was also a contradiction. The contradiction was that they shied away from attempting any structural change in the existing social order, and one cannot overlook this kind of a contradiction and discrepancy. So, both these heterodox sects developed a very restricted notion of equality, and this restricted concept of equality and fraternity remained confined to their Sangha, and even here women remained largely subordinate to men. Buddhism was practical not to alienate its clients and patrons by admitting slaves or debtors or deserting soldiers, and so indirectly it was validating hierarchy. And among the people who joined the Sangha or supported Buddhism from outside, the overwhelming majority belonged to high castes. So, the distinction between the affluent and the destitute, the high and the low was pronounced and quite explicit, as has been pointed out by Vivekanand Jha, and was applied to jatis, kulas, kammas, and also crafts in Buddhist and Jain philosophy. And if we take into consideration Pali canon and caste, the occupation of the flower sweeper and the crafts of the basket maker, leather worker, charmkara or weaver, potter and barber are designated as low, and the untouchables, nishadas, pukusas, venas and rathakaras were stigmatized as despised castes. That is, the term that was used was hina jatis in Pali canon. So, we must take into consideration these kind of discrepancies that existed, and this also brings to light the fact that caste had come to play an important role in economic life, and it developed strong roots in occupations in the birth-based hierarchical class society of early India, and even movements of protest against injustice could not change this ground reality or to offer any viable and enduring alternative. Thank you.